Meeting with a brief, and I'll try to keep it brief, depending on how much participation you folks get into it, could stretch itself out. Strategic discussion before we actually get into the nuts and bolts of how we deal with the resources available to us. Admittedly, this is a gimmick you see up there, but there's a serious side to it in that there is an elephant in the room when we talk about this topic. You know, it says down the bottom there, I'm right there in the room and no one even acknowledges me. This is not an academic exercise. We're not playing with monopoly money, and the decisions that are made end up having an impact, sometimes not a positive impact, on some of the citizens of our town. So it's important that we understand that Bill, and in this case that Bill is his last name, it's Tax Bill, is the elephant in the room, and we have to make sure that, I know we all know that, this is more to make sure we remind ourselves and let our constituents know that we're very much aware of that limitation as well. Now, I brought with me a copy of the May 6th town meeting warrant. The reason I did that is because it's convenient, because we had the charter review results in there, and the town charter appears as it exists today and as it's working, and then the red writing is how it's working its way through the State House, and presumably we'll get one signed by the governor sooner or later when that process is finished. In the charter, somebody was smart enough to write in the very original charter, section 3.1, the legislative powers of the town shall be exercised by a town meeting open to all voters of the town of Sandwich. Now, why is that important with Bill up there? There's a perception out there that those of us at this table are the ones who feed Bill. Well, what the legislative powers of the town include raising, appropriating, and spending money. We can't do anything serious in that area without going to town meeting. So it's not the Board of Selectmen, it's not the school committee, it's the legislative branch of this government, which is an open town meeting, that makes the decisions on how fat Bill gets. Also in the charter, flip a page here, and it says, let's see, this is section 4.2.5I. It says, the Board of Selectmen shall annually review a long-range plan to project the future needs of the town and report on this at town meeting. For the last 3 years, we've been printing the Selectmen's long-range plan, a 5 or 6 page document at the back of the warrant. What that sentence I just said translates to is, we are required to have a plan, and we are required to explain that plan to the voters. Unfortunately, it doesn't say the voters are required to pay attention, but we still have to keep trying to do our best to explain what's there. And one of the things in the Selectmen's long-range plan, I think it's 2 subsection E, sub 1, says that we will adopt a long-range capital plan. The Capital Improvement Planning Committee, I think we should give them a little fancier name. They're the Capital Investment Planning Committee in this particular case, put a lot of work into drafting a long-range capital plan for us, and we adopted it last spring. And the next chart, if it's ready, Bud. What's up there is page 7, summary of prioritized large-scale capital projects. I took the liberty of adding a couple more things down at the bottom. I'm going to come back to this one, but it's a list we, the Board of Selectmen, kind of jumped the gun on the Capital Improvement Planning Committee. We came up with a list and prioritized it before they actually completed their work. but they came to the same 12 items that we did, and there's some differences in the listing of priorities up there. You may recall that I was not a big fan of prioritizing them because they're all things we're going to have to deal with. We just have to create opportunities and jump on opportunities as they come along to address these things. I'm going to leave this chart for a minute, but I'll come back to it. This one says strategy options. For each of those 12 or 14 things on that list, I believe we should have a strategy. And the 4 options that I've listed up there are the ones that I've come up with, but there may be 2 or 3 more. One of those may be baloney, but I think we need to, together, or at least the Board of Selectmen has to come up with a list of potential strategy options for dealing with each of those big ticket items that show up in the long-range capital plan. Now, I just used one word. Oh, I cheated. I used 2 words on the last one. The default strategy is study the issue, toss it around some more, decide that we need more information, go out looking for more information, and kick it down the road another year or 2. There are times when that's the right thing to do. One that we've tried a couple of times in my brief tenure on the board is what I label the home run strategy. It was 3 years ago that we went in with the omnibus bill to fix all the buildings in town, and
5, but
yeah, it was a big debt exclusion that lumped a lot of buildings together, and the voters said, no dice, we're not going to do that. When we backed off from that and put in just the school roofs, they saw the relevance of that, and they said yes. And we went to, I think the library heat vent and air conditioning system was on that list as well, if I recall. And when we put that up as an individual article, they said yes again. But when we tried to hit the home run by taking care of everything all at once, it was just too much for the taxpayers and the segment of the taxpayers who showed up to vote to take that on. We tried another home run with the public safety building back in May, and again, the voters said, no, that's too much, too fast. So maybe there's a lesson for us in trying, not swinging for the fences when we put something up in front of the voters. There's a reallocation. I've had people look me in the eye and say, you've got all the resources you need, you're just putting too much of it into the schools. I don't agree with that position, but it's a strategy, and there may come a time when that has to be used in one sense or another. And finally, there's the one I labeled small ball. That's the blue pit and a walk and a sacrifice and a single between short and third to get you 2 runs. Take things a little piece at a time. Now, just for some examples, I'm going to go back to that chart. I think actually you can go forward or back to it. I'm just going to try and run quickly down this list and give some examples of how we might apply at least those 4 strategy options to this list of items. I am not in any way suggesting that we should put all of these things on the warrant next May. That's the reason we have 5 selectmen and a school committee is so, that's at about 14, if you count Richard and Bud, that's 14 heads are way better than 1. So we need to really think this through and decide what strategies we want to adopt and when we want to put things forward. So again, I repeat, I am in no way suggesting that we should do all of the things that I'm going to run through right now. I'm just saying we should consider picking some of them and actually putting them forward in the warrant next May and on the ballot if necessary, and they probably would be because many of them go outside of Proposition 2.5 in the Thursday after town meeting. So just, I'm going to try and do this very quickly, and we can go back and have questions later, or or whatever. But in terms of public safety, what could we do with a small ball strategy with public safety? There seems to be a consensus building that a third ambulance crew or a third crew fully trained to do both emergency medical and fire is part of the build-out solution. So one thing we could do is put that, I think the price tag on that was a $1.1 million operational override on the warrant and on the ballot, and move forward with that. And it would make sense if they had a place to hang their hat down in East Sandwich, which is underserved right now. So I think the price tag on a modular substation was set around 2.1. So we'd look at a $2.1 million debt exclusion in this case to handle the substation in East Sandwich, and just stop there. Don't try to go further. Let the voters make the pace. If they want both of those things, they'll tell us. If they don't, they'll tell us that as well. Public roads and infrastructure, Paul Tilton's been in twice while I've been on the board, made a very good case last time for the need to invest $10 million in our roads. But the nature of that work is it comes in increments. There's a lot of separate different roads, parking lots, tennis courts, sidewalks. There's no need to put the whole 10 million up at once. And I think what we asked Paul to do when he was here the last time is come back to us in January with something a little less ambitious, and we consider putting that on the warrant. Water resource management. We could scare ourselves to death with that one. You know, whenever you see it in the paper, it's billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars. Nell's out there, yeah. My understanding is there's 120 or so watersheds on Cape Cod. Sandwich has about 10% of the area of Cape Cod. Our neighbor, the Joint Base Cape Cod, is all sewered. We don't have to concern ourselves with any of the watersheds. There's 11 of them that flow off to the west and south from the base. I won't make you play a guessing game, but I'll tell you right out. Sandwich has an interest in 4 watersheds out of that more than 120, just 4. We have all of Old Harbor. We have all of Scorton Creek. The folks over at UMass Dartmouth won't release the data, but all the preliminary indications are that those are in pretty good shape. We raise shellfish there every year. No problems. A little trouble with bacteria sometimes. The other 2 are Papaneset Bay, which we share with Mashpee, and 3 bays that we share with Barnstable. We're a minor contributor to both of those. So all we have to do is respond when the time comes, and the time is probably, we've got this understudy right now. We've got a good consultant group. They're going to come back to us and tell us what the bill is going to be, but let's not get excited about it till we see that. Beach erosion. We're paying for the current permitting out of community preservation funds. What we hear when we go with our handout to the feds is, where's your beach management plan? Well, we got one. Where are your permits? We'll have them soon. Where's the sand going to come from? We know where that is. I think we should appropriate money from the CPA account, a significant amount of money, but I have no clue how to set that significant amount until we hear from the Woods Hole Group as to what the total bill is going to be. Next set, municipal offices. That's one I think Bud would agree we can push that down the road a bit. It's something that we definitely should do. The wing school reuse, well, let's skip that one and go to school consolidation first. We've got the school committee here. They have a strategy. The strategy is to go from 4 buildings to 3. It comes in 2 phases. Phase 1 is STEM, going to happen next fall. Phase 2, they haven't voted on a date certain yet, but I hear that that's coming along well, and it's maybe fall 2015, fall 2016. But they have a strategy. The strategy addresses 2 big problems: declining enrollment and out-migration of students. So what we have to decide in May is, are we going to continue to support that strategy, which I certainly think we should, we have to be careful not to pull the rug out from under them as they're full bore going toward something that's going to do the town a lot of good. Wing school reuse, well, they're going to surplus the wing school. It could become the Sand Hill School and Clark Haddad building on steroids if we don't figure out what we're going to do with it.
Is that confirmed?
I said they haven't voted on it yet. But, Richard is, it's certainly gotten a lot of serious discussion in school committee
No, I
meetings.
don't question that part of it,
Yeah.
but you're right. That is a key part of a lot of the things that
Yeah.
we're thinking about.
The next step, once that vote is taken, is to assess whether we can really reuse the wing school or not. My intuition says we can, but if you haven't noticed, I kind of like to base my decisions on data, not intuition. So we need to get some data. The school committee votes that they are definitely going to surplus wing, then we need to appropriate some money to get somebody in that will tell us whether we can reuse it or not. We also have to be careful how we ask the question. If we get somebody in who makes a living building new stuff, and we ask, we can't really reuse this, can we? We'll get the answer that we asked for. If we hire somebody who makes a living reconditioning old buildings, well, they're going to give us the answer we'd expect from somebody who does that. So we have to be careful who we ask and how we ask the question. But again, I say right now all I've got is my instincts and some numbers. The consultant that we hired to evaluate what it would cost to recondition the wing school as a school came back with either $27.8 million or $28.7 million, I forget which. But as a school, pretty much doubles the price, and that was for the whole business, the 1927 wing, which is a, there was no, the Americans with Disability Act was 50 years in the future when they built that building. Asbestos wasn't recognized for its evils, and lead paint wasn't a big item, so there's a nightmare there, and that added to the cost of reconditioning. I would say the maximum to do what needs doing there, intuitively now, but we need data, is $12–14 million. That's a lot of money. But if that buys us a senior center, a community center, and consolidated municipal office buildings, it's a bargain. The library, I participated in a long-range planning effort with the library folks. We've had 2 meetings. One was just before the holidays and one was just after. They still seem determined to swing for the fences. They've got that grant application pending, and it will surface at some point, and we'll have to take it under consideration. Down there, Group C, the recreational field plan, we did 2 things last week that addressed that with the DeConto Stadium and the artificial surface. The marina office building is going to happen out of marina funding sooner or later, so that's not to be concerned. And the bike paths and pedestrian improvements, they're working their way through, mostly based on state and federal grant money. So those things are perking along. I added 2 down at the bottom. Carl Johansson's remarks, I don't think he was referring to this. I don't recall discussing it with him at all. For a couple decades, we had an economic development committee. They were dedicated, smart, serious people who really wanted to make economic development happen, but they were unpaid volunteers. About 4 years ago, we shifted the model to the SEIC. Again, smart, dedicated, serious people wanted to make economic development happen, unpaid volunteers. I said in the school committee meeting, and I'll say again, it's in the nature of unpaid volunteers that they work on what they want when they want to. And my personal view is that economic development is too important to be left in the hands of unpaid volunteers. So I would prefer to see us take that internal and actually pay somebody to do the hard slogging that it takes to make economic development happen. The SEIC still has a role. They're very useful as a think tank. They have connections that could bring the kind of businesses that we want to see in Sandwich to Sandwich. But Bud needs someone on staff. We need to beef up the planning and development office in a way that allows us to get some of the hard work done that's going to bring this to fruition. And last is one of those charts that I handed out says that Sandwich is tied for worst in how much we squeeze out of local receipts. And there's good reasons for that. Dennis has probably 5 miles of beaches on each side. We have 7 miles, but about 6 of it is all privately held. So the public beaches in Sandwich, we just don't have the beaches to generate the revenue that some of the towns down Cape who have coasts on both sides have. But there have to be some ways to be a little more creative in how we collect local receipts. So that's all I intended to do this evening, was to say, here's the things that we've said we put priority on. How are we going to move the ball forward on some of those is the question, and the school committee is very much involved in that entire middle section, the part B there, because what you eventually decide to do regarding wing very much dictates the flexibility that we have to deal with some of those issues in the middle. I have a suggestion that sometime in January, the Board of Selectmen meet in a workshop format to actually nail some strategies on and project what we're willing to ask the voters for. Again, the voters are the ones that drive the train here. All we can do is formulate yes and no questions and ask. We got to let the voters, it's not a matter of letting them. State law and our charter says the voters drive the train. They'll set the pace. We just have to ask the right questions. Open it to the floor now. Comments? Questions? Yes, Frank.
May I get copies of what was shown? They weren't part of the packet. Okay.
Right now, or do you want it?
No.
I just put them together this morning.
Okay.
This was part of
I'm sorry?
This was.
That wasn't in my pack.
Oh, it's in mine.
No, that's fine. But anyway, a couple of things, just for clarity and so that people understand, again, the historical thing. Let's start with the CIPC report, the Capital Improvement Plan report, without taking anything away from the group that did a lot of great work. The topics that they raised were initiated through in 2007, and I'm glad Linnell's here because she was part of it. She and I had meetings with, we had at that time, I think it was Nancy Young, who was part of that, Jim Lehane. We were trying to address these exact things. You know, what are the capital needs of the town? And Bud was part of it in terms of, and I've said this before, I'm repeating myself, but we had public hearings on Saturdays. We did 2 of them, I believe, and we were soliciting feedback. And this is where I always use this 41 people, the same 41 people, kind of originated for me. I say that tongue-in-cheek. And we developed the list of the items. And Linnell and I then had breakfast one morning, I remember, with the I guess it was the chairman at that time of the CIPC. This was in 2007 now. I say it for a reason. 2000, we handed it off. Okay, we handed off the list. They were going to take the ball and run with it. Okay. So you see how long it's taken. Okay. The topics didn't change at all.
And
you
so
know.
that's
and
why
I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I'm saying that it's implied that, you know, I don't mean you're implying it, but it sounds like they came up with these ideas. Well, they may have come up with some, but it was the Board of Selectmen that kind of initiated this stuff.
Yeah.
Because you made the comment at the school committee, you know, nothing has been done in the way of strategic planning. That's not true. We've been doing strategic planning, you know, it may not have evolved
I said
into
nothing's
anything.
been done in terms of strategic taking action.
Well, I just said that. I mean, we did the planning, but, you know, nothing happened.
Bud's
A lot
office
didn't
is
happen.
full of dusty plans, I know that.
And it will probably continue to be a dusty plan. Long after you and I are gone, a lot of people in this room
Well,
are
see,
gone.
my goal here,
Very
Frank, is
honestly.
so you and I will have a place to play cribbage when we get done sitting up here. Again, I'm suggesting a different approach, you know? If we keep
And-
trying
and
the
I don't
same thing
disagree
over...
with you.
yeah, try
I
the same
don't
thing
disagree
over and
with
over
you.
again and expect different
I
results.
like your idea about us having work. I think that makes sense to me. But can I comment on a couple other things? I'm a little concerned when you want to, and you've done this work, we haven't discussed it at all. We have a committee that's working on public safety plan. When you come up with an idea about extracting, and it's not a bad idea, you know, because hopefully we've learned the lesson. Maybe not swinging for the seats is the best. I've never believed in that strategy, okay, quite honestly. But fragmenting that, or that idea, really the genesis of that should be the committee itself. That group needs to kind of think about it, what are the implications, then we can talk about the political components, the funding components of that. So I'd rather see that idea come out of the committee. Okay. You know.
If we meet in workshop format, I would certainly expect that Bud and the chiefs and the...
I'm just
you know,
kind of
yeah.
just, you know, making sure that we're not running off in 63,000 different directions here. The Wing School redirect, or the Wing School project, and we've talked about this a couple of times. We invested a lot of money a couple of years ago. I forget what it was, $10,000, $15,000 you guys put into an assessment.
It was before my
Probably
time.
before your time. I forget what the number was, but we invested some money. And we do this all the time, and it's wrong, in my opinion. We ask them to tell us what we should be doing. We should be saying to consultants, let's make the assumption that the school committee signs off, the superintendent signs off, and declares the building surplus. It's now in Bud's hands, it's his problem. But we say, and you're right, you know, just intuitively, it sounds like a good idea to consolidate all of these things. But before we do that, or we come to that conclusion, we should think about it and then ask the consultant, here's what we're thinking about. Here's the building. Now lend us your expertise in telling us what parts of the buildings can be used. Here's what we want. Can this be put in here? And if so, where? That kind. I would rather see that approach. So this is another topic for that workshop kind of thing, okay? So I just don't want these things kind of just, you know, going all different ways and this massive ball of confusion kind of evolving. It should come out of the appropriate areas, even a workshop. So that's all I have to say.
Ralph?
I believe the path we started on last week is where we're heading on right now. I think the critical point is not where it's coming from, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, but the idea is that we're willing to look at these different strategies, not just look at them and come up with a strategic plan, but the point is a strategic execution of that plan. You know, we have a lot of tools at our disposal to make things happen. We just have to find the right tool to complete the job. So, you know, we, in our workshop, you know, first of all, we should agree on what tools we want to use, be it reallocation, be it override, be it debt exclusion. You know, come up, that's the first part. What are we willing, what number are we looking to bring to the voters every year? That's another part of it. Then the next part is bring in the groups that are affected by it. Who's affected by it? CIPC, beach management, the schools, public safety, you know. So then, you know, we have a base for them to build on. And so we know what we're willing to support. We understand what they could bring to us that fits within that guidelines. So we could bring it to town meeting and hopefully bring it to its successful conclusion. And I think you know, now, you know, we're heading down this road. Hopefully we'll continue to look at all the tools we have at our disposal and start, really thinking what works best to get the job done.
Susan?
Well, I just want to say that capital planning existed long before 2007. And I know that because in 2001 or 2, I've lost track of the time, I made a presentation before town meeting that costed out public safety building, roads, school issues at that time, not water resources, municipal offices. All of that has been in the works forever. And I think that having done this before many years ago, I guess while I appreciate your comments relative to looking at things in a new way, I think we should look at things in a new way. And I agree with Ralph. I don't think we can go into this, we're going to do this strategy with this and this strategy with this, even though we might come up with that. I think it gets confusing to be preliminary about it. I know that the town, if given a plan and if knowing in advance approximately what's going to be introduced where and how that's going to be introduced in the context of a whole approach, I know that in the past, we have been supported, whether we do it all at once or we do it step by step, which you suggested was a better way of doing it. But I really think that before we start talking about this in public, I think we really do need to have a workshop so that we're sort of on the same page about the approach. And the sooner the better, as far as I'm concerned, because these things have been around for so long that, something has to happen now.
Until we actually ask the voters to support some of these things by putting questions, articles on the warrant and questions on the ballot, nothing's going to move forward. Andrea? You can't get there from here.
We can take it over.
That swings around.
Yeah, the wonders of modern science.
That's all right. I'll
Better things for
slide
better
over.
living
How's
through
that?
chemistry.
Oh, you guys can hear me anyway, and people at home may not be able to. So I guess I'm wondering where we're going tonight with the conversation. And I just want to add, because I know Jim came to us last week and he gave us a preliminary of some documents and information about strategic planning for tonight. And one of the things that I don't hear us talking about in government, town government, whether it's the school or the town. So when I say town government, I mean all of us collectively. Because I do strategic planning on a weekly basis in the world that I live in. And part of that, a very small part of that, is capital improvements. The most significant part of that is how we can be more efficient in our business. And in the town, our business is service. And while we can look at capital improvements and talk about going back to the taxpayer to pay for it, what are we providing for efficiency? And we're not talking about that. In the public sector, when we talk about strategic planning and efficiency, we pull out our financials and we go, wow, payroll costs are getting really high versus our cost of materials and our G&A expenses versus our sales expenses. How can we control those costs so that we can plan on the future, so we can add on to the building, so we can replace the roof? So while it's nice to talk about how we're going to fund all of these capital improvements, we have to be cognizant of the fact that we have to add the other piece into that. And the other piece of that is more efficiencies. So I just don't want to get too far off of what our goal is here tonight, because I think we can have this conversation maybe as far as strategic planning goes, in another forum.
The point of the second chart that I used in the school committee meeting was that all rumors to the contrary, the town government in Sandwich is run very efficiently. And that is also true of the school system in Sandwich, where you folks spend far less than the state average. So Bud continuously points out to us that he's running with a staff that's 30% short of the average town of our size and still delivering services to the taxpayers. Now, obviously, any big organization is going to have some inefficiencies in it, and we have to find them and root them out and fix them. But there's not $1 million worth of inefficiencies to find and fix. If they are, a bunch of them are in the fact that the working conditions we've got our people working in are subpar. You know, I've read Bud's job description, I've read Bud's contract, I've read what it says he's supposed to do in the town charter. Essentially, I would translate it as Bud's job is swatting $10,000 mosquitoes, cutting the heads off an occasional $100,000 snake, shooting an occasional $1 million alligator, and it's our job to drain the swamp that's breeding all these things. So until we step up to those capital things that have been churning around in the background, it's hard to ask Bud to be more efficient in the palaces currently under his control.
I guess I'm confused. Are we going to go over budget assumptions and
Yeah,
so forth tonight?
this is it's going to kind of let this conversation wind itself down, and
Okay.
then we'll
'Cause
go.
that was
Then
essentially my
Bud has
point.
got the conventional budget summary chart and the where are we? What kind of gap do we have to fill? Richard, you preparing to?
Well, I'm listening quite intently, and I just have to say something that really strikes me, because for those who may be viewing tonight's meeting, where I am sitting, everybody hopefully in the spirit of the holidays is out there checking out all of those lighted giants. But where I'm sitting, as I look to the chair, I'm seeing a rainbow over your head and a dove of peace on your shoulder. So maybe that's somewhat fitting in terms of where we are. You know, I've been at this for a lot of years, and I've certainly come to love this community, love this town. I'm very much aware that for all of us, our property values are really tied to the quality of the services that we offer. Economists will tell us that. So as we look at a very significant component of those services, namely our schools, you know, I'm reminded that the schools belong to all of us. The children belong to all of us. They are our schools, they are our kids. And I know sometimes we can step back and want to look at it from a business point of view, and I have some experience in business myself. But what I've come to discover, you know, business doesn't always have all of the right answers. You know, Eastern Airlines could probably speak to that. There are some out there that didn't make it. The reality is we do dance in two different worlds. Our work is about the education of children. And every single one of us at this table benefited from education. A generation before us paid for our education, and now we're asked to step up and pay for the education of today's children. I just want to, again, remind people that as a district, we're on the move. We're a district in transition. I have a document from the state of Massachusetts on my desk that actually indicates that we are in the midst of a major reorganization of the Sandwich Public Schools. And it is no secret to anyone, we began this conversation when I first arrived. And that conversation had to do with declining enrollment. It had to do with efficiency in terms of, do we really need to be operating 4 school buildings for the size of our population? And with the good help of many, many people, we arrived at a point where we embarked on this endeavor, the first part being Phase 1, the STEM Academy. And yes, we did indicate that we didn't need to put a $15 million renovation on the high school if we gave up the first floor that served as the central offices and moved over to Oak Ridge. And we just indicated that we need the community support for the program. We needed to have a legitimate, honest, and sincere enticement for our families to be able to be willing to step away from the K-8 buildings that they had come to love, and especially the Wing School. And so we are well on our way, and we will open up the STEM Academy this next fall. We still don't have the budget that we're going to need. We will be presenting our needs through budget workshops with the school committee beginning on January 8th. So we have a lot of work to do. I can tell you from my colleagues, some of my former ones in Connecticut that stay in touch with me, and those here that I've come to know on the Cape, the speed that we are moving at is quite remarkable, and change does not come easily. To move at this pace and to create this amount of change really requires a tremendous amount of relational trust on the part of many different constituencies: our parents, our faculty and staff, our taxpayers, and just as importantly, our kids, who are most impacted by the decisions that we're going to make and how we're going to move forward. We are very fortunate right now in Sandwich that I believe most people would say we have, at this moment in time, a pretty remarkable team to actually be able to move this forward. And many of you know, many of those people that we've interacted with, you've interacted with them, and I never want to take their work and their efforts for granted, because in all of my 40-plus years, it's a remarkable team. And they're working so hard for this change to occur, and we believe that we are going to be able to do this and do this well. It's not just our employees. We have a remarkable group of parents, our STEM Parent Advisory Group. They are so accepting of where we are now and so trusting in what we have presented that they came to me and said, look, we know there's going to be Phase 2, where we're going to be asked to move completely out of the Wing School and merge our populations at Oak Ridge and Forestdale. Would you, as superintendent, support us forming a K-6 parent advisory group so the parents are walking step in step with what we are going to be attempting to do? So we have a lot of work ahead of us, included in the success of that STEM Academy is a now 18-member science or STEM advisory board. That's an amazing group of professionals, and many of them here in Sandwich, many of them incredibly well connected, many of them without kids in the school. And I say to them, what brings you here? And they're amazingly dedicated. We now have, to balance the equation, we now have an Arts and Humanities Advisory Board, again, made up of many folks from Sandwich that are helping in this endeavor. So it's an amazing moment in time. Our state commissioner heard about this plan and this model and said, I'd like to come and see it after you cut that ribbon in September. So we want to be sure that even though we realize times are tight, we realize that. But we want to be sure that when it comes to services, at least what we can do on our side of the equation for the schools, to come up with a program that is fiscally responsible, but one that this community can be incredibly proud of. I do want to, since the school committee is here this evening, I have not presented to the school committee my plans for Phase 2. I want to make that very clear. But it is no surprise to them when they know that there's Phase 1, and naturally there will be a Phase 2. But I will tell you, it's my nature, as I've said before, my word is my bond. And when I indicate to the school committee, here's what the plan is, it's not carved in stone. I want people to push back and say, no, it would be better if we do this. If I listen to the voices of dissent, the voices of concern about the plan, we can modify and get to a better place. But make no mistake, my team is working on phase 2. We believe that if we handle this well, that in fact we can come to this community and make a proposal that can get us to a good place for phase 2 in a time frame that I think will please most people. But I have to give my absolute pledge to our parents, to our students, to our faculty and staff, to the Sandwich Education Association, which now has a new face and which is working incredibly well with us in a very cooperative fashion to move this forward. And I have to give all those folks my word, which is my bond, that we are going to do this in a way that preserves the vital programs that we offer our kids in what will become K-6 in phase 2, that we will do the right thing by them. And so we feel we can get there, but we're going to need to demonstrate to our parents that by working together as a community with with the selectmen, with the finance committee, certainly with the school committee, and as Mr. Pierce points out, the ultimate authority, the voter at town meeting, we've got to demonstrate that it's time to say we can rather than we can't. And we can do this, and we can move this community forward, move the district forward, but it's going to require support. Because if we can't get there, it will make it very difficult for me or anyone who would follow in my footsteps to maintain the level of trust with our parent community to say, trust us, we can do this. We can do this together. Your kids will be fine. The programs that they have, the vital things that we do to educate them well, will all be protected and preserved. So there's no big special bells and whistles in terms of what we are doing. But we are opening up a 5th school. Until we can cross that bridge where we get to operating 4 schools and 3 buildings, we have to operate 5. And we have to provide level service in that 5th building for over 500 students. And I just needed to bring everybody back to that reality. And so in the budget process that I have planned, January 8th, we're going to be doing an overview and workshop. January 15th, workshop and deliberation. On the 22nd, we will continue our deliberation, and we'll host a public hearing for those who want to speak to the budget as they've heard it on the 8th and the 15th. There'll be a week of reflection that the school committee has said they would like to have, because then they'll come back together on the 29th to vote on the superintendent's proposed budget, which at that point it will become the school committee's proposed budget that will move on to the town on February 1, and we'll go from there. So we will be doing our best to make the case to the community of what is going to be needed. And again, we just hope that we can all work together well to achieve that.
Yeah, when I was going through my remarks, I got into an awkward position when I was going through the school reuse and the school consolidation. I neglected to say that I recall in September of, or maybe it was late August of 2011, Richard was at his second meeting of the wing task team, which Andrea was, and he looked at that $15 million addition, which would have cost us $8 million after the SBA, and he said, we don't need that. Give me, I think the number was 900, yeah, it was, I remember now, it was $900,000, and we'll put the STEM program together and we'll make this work. So far, In the FY14 budget, there's $150,000 for some capital things. Last month, Article 1 included another $150,000. That's 150 times 2 is 300. I wouldn't be surprised if the number that was 900,000 2 years ago was somewhat larger now. I hope not, but hope springs eternal, I guess, is the question. That still leaves $600,000 at least outstanding, and I don't see how we can do that inside Proposition 2.5. So another consideration has to be a specifically oriented override to take care of the bump in the cost curve that's going to come with going to 5 schools in 4 buildings as an intermediary to eventually having 4 schools in 3 buildings and shedding, if we have to pay $600,000 up front to shed the costs of operating the wing complex, the town will end up being ahead. So I neglected to mention that another thing we need to consider is how do we fund the transition from running 4 schools in 4 buildings through 5 schools in 4 buildings to 4 schools in 3 buildings and not break the bank. Other comments from the school committee? All right, so if, but I don't know what we've got on our agenda for January 2nd. I know we didn't schedule January 9th, but is the Board of Selectmen agreed that we should try a workshop sometime early in January to...
I will be here.
That's right, you're off on vacation, or...
Go to the island?
Yeah. Is it Seattle this time?
I'll
or
be back on the 16th.
the 16th? We have to know what we're going to be, what are we going to ask the voters? We have to know that. The drop dead date is the usual one, sometime in April when you have to put the
Yeah, I
warrant to
think
bed.
there's a charter requirement for the board to vote a recommendation to the Finance Committee on or about March 1st, and then roughly the end of the first week in April is when we need to have a final budget.
Right. You never get quality decisions by rushing people into anything, so I would rather have Susan here and take more time at it and do it sometime after she gets back on January 16th so we can have the full board here. And, Richard is going to be working the Phase 2 through the school committee over that time period. So we can host a workshop in late January, early February, and actually decide what we will support putting in front of the voters on the first Monday in May and the first Thursday in May of 2014. Does that meet with the, we'll leave it unscheduled at the moment, but aim for maybe that last open Tuesday in January, or Thursday in January. Yes, yes, Andrea?
Is the board going to provide the school committee and the school administration with a guideline, a budget guideline?
That's next.
Okay.
So
So if we come back with a budget that's 3%,
well, just
I just
We-
want to
we'll
make
wrap
sure
up-
that
we'll-
we don't duplicate efforts on our side either.
yeah, so we'll wrap up this discussion of strategy, which I didn't think was going to take this long, but I'm glad it did. And now we'll go into what we usually do, which is jump straight into what resources do we have within Proposition 2.5 and how are we going to divide them up. So, Bud, you've got the chance to lead that discussion, right?
Sure. So I'll just make it really fast. In the Selectmen packet, and I should have thought ahead, and I can make extra copies if needed. Really, the only thing I put in there was the timeline that was been set, which I think everyone's aware of already, for the budget process. I put a copy of the final FY14 budget that was approved at town meeting. You may ask, why is that in the negative? And the answer is because when the state made the local aid changes in July, it shifted things. But again, this is just the budget estimate.